Right, very well. Good afternoon, everyone. And I will quickly set the framework that is we'll have the 5 minute intro highlighting specific angles, and then we will engage in a discussion and some questions, and hopefully you have the chance to ask questions here or online. So the task of the discussion is to look at the 24/7 connectivities of different sources, requirements, what solutions are being provided, and also the jet vectors in the cyber space. And indeed, the main mission that our defense forces had, and the NATO strategic concept is deterrence and defense. So it's not just abstract connectivity, but actually to make sure that our societies remain safe and at peace. So when we look at peace, crisis, and conflict, we are at peace, and our task is to make sure that that stays unchanged. So the 5G network, of course, has been a total game changer, also in the defense sector, and the solutions that are being worked on between the industry and the military also benefit civilian sectors. For example, we have threat detection using drones and sensors, data analytics to decide on those threats. We have advanced situational analytics, mission management systems, enhanced critical communication abilities, and so on and so forth. So there is a variety of different angles where the spillover from all the research development, experimentation, testing, exercising will benefit society as such. For that to be successful both in that critical mission of deterrence and defense, obviously we need the private and public sector working together. That's why we have such a great mix today here. My first question will go to the state secretary on his persons on the strategic necessity of connectivity. What are the requirements that you are setting for the providers, for those who are working with the defense services?
Oh, thank you, Baiba. Good afternoon. I think as I'm since all I'm on this panel with not the expert on 5G technology side, but nevertheless, I'm one to represent the estimate and who have to set up the requirements. And I'm we call this Ingmārs as a machine gun as a national guard. I can do some things, but I probably will. Mention four important issues from the side of the military. What I think is very important, especially when we also considering 5G and networks, communication in general. One, I would say it's redundancy, because as we see in any warfare, we have to have at least several options to communicate. That I think the most problematic case when you have one option of communication and one it's suddenly you lose this option on it. Of course, they always can go to the bicycles or physical communication, but still, I think that's 5G provides good option for redundancy, for backup, and actually. And then the second, so for my point, is also which relates to the first is that I would call it unblocking, because basically, as we see, also in Ukraine, where we see the real conventional war, and that I think is difference. That is, you have to basically disappear once you use specific military communication. It's very easy to basically detect you, and once you switch to the ordinary communication, which is used widely by general public, it's very difficult actually to spot you and to identify. The third point, and this is affordability, because I think we generally in the military we went somewhere in the direction of high tech and developing technologies which are very costly. We have actually the equipment which costs millions of millions. And then we have communication. Military communication is probably the most important part of that. And okay, that's okay when we send the one battalion into Afghanistan and we could cover those costs. but then it has to basically deploy and defend our country with of soldiers, then it's not okay, because then you simply can't afford anymore to provide the basic things. I think that very important issue, because we have to have very simple and cheap equipment, and I think it's we see that necessity in Ukraine. And then the last thing I would say, this is a general. In Latvia's case, we have to defend our country. We are not planning to go somewhere outside or neither to those countries for mission, and therefore we will use our own terrain. We will use our territory, and therefore 5G general provides very good base for connecting many things, many basic for intelligence warning, for putting in different sensors and basically helping to have the good operational picture, and also basically to stop the enemy as close to the border as possible. That would be my points as somebody who puts requirements of future force.
Okay, very good. The 4 concrete points. I will now move on to the industry side, and then the last speaker will be our CCNOE colleague. Ingmārs, LRT since 2020 already, together with National Armed Forces, has established a 5G testing site in an actual military base, which is multinational, attempting to be multi-domain, everything that NATO sort of requires. What can you tell us to the audience here and online on what have been the most significant sort of solutions developed, whether on medical, virtual reality, or other issues, and what do you advise to the others?
Thank you. First of all, maybe a little one step back. Probably there are many people from the telecommunication world here to set the context. Why do we, as a very civilian company, doing our nice job with bringing voice and internet, what are we doing in the military base? So the whole point here is that for many years now, we are trying to invest our money, time, and resources to understand what would be the future sense of the 5G technology, because solving simple things with broadband is not top priority for us, because since we've done this homework with the 4G and we are decent player in fixed wireless access here in Latvian market already with the 4G technology, so the 5G allegedly brings all these super cool future possibilities no one has actually seen. So that's why we're trying to invest together with partners. And one of the great partners has been our armed forces and the Ministry of Defense, actually, to build out the ecosystem. And actually, one of the objects and efforts was to actually set out first European 5G test site for testing the tactical applications for 5G technology. And we've done many things. We're looking into many areas. Last year, for particular, we were looking into the combination of so the army don't just do war. So hopefully for most of the time, or 99 or hopefully 100% of the time, they're doing activities other than war. That will be training, logistics, and many things else. So in that sense, army and any military base is much more alike manufacturing or logistical activity. So all the things we are been fantasizing about, digital twins and sensors and everything else, will very much apply just as well to the army, and the complexities of managing stocks and everything else is there. One of the use cases we were looking into was actually training. So is it actually possible to have many teams from different areas participating in different geographical locations, participating in the same training in some virtual space? Last year we were conducting, is it possible that a soldier with the support of augmented reality, can he maintain complex military equipment without a prior training? That was based on true story, based on experience from Afghanistan, when there was a complex equipment broken down. So it took like many weeks to bring in some specialists from Europe to actually fix it. So is it solvable? And this year we are finally focusing on actual mesh networks and bubbles. So can you place a little private 5G network on a military vehicle? Can he has his own private network moving around? and all the cascade of functionalities, which brings, use of different frequencies. Can you actually camouflage not only in a city area? Does use of different frequencies can camouflage you just because of their physical properties? All the solutions of positioning that you can actually have a substitute for GPS systems and so on and so forth. So there are quite a lot of things that 5G can bring to the table for the military, and this is a function of NATO being again interested in civilian technologies, which wasn't the case some years ago. There was a clear gap between the military tech and civilian technology, and all the recent theaters around the world that show that adversaries are actively using very cheap, very affordable civilian technology to disrupt our forces. So NATO, I think, is much more interested these days in what civilian technology can bring to the table.
Absolutely, that is what I can confirm. And actually, in the NATO warfighting capstone concept, which is for 2040, the Allied Command Transformation, you work with them. The sort of digital transition and the whole civil-military resilience parts and the ability to provide those multi-domain operations involve civil and commercial operators in a systemic way. I will now turn to Philip Agard from Nokia. Philip, you've been working with LMT, but you've been also involved in using the opportunities both at NATO but also in the EU Defence Fund for moving ahead with these big changes that are needed in sort of streamlining the private and public sector work in the defense sector. Would you like to tell us a few words? What have been the most significant developments there?
Yes, thank you, absolutely. So indeed, Nokia has been active in the defense sector since many decades because we are providing dual-use technologies like IP optics backbone for connecting the army bases, for example. But now, definitely, since NATO in particular has identified 5G and 6G as one of those 9 emerging disruptive technologies, so it's become a lot of conversations, a lot of opportunity to explain and identify the proper use cases. And I think, as Ingmārs stressed, the use case span the whole spectrum of activities where defense is active. So it goes from the strategic domain, the army bases themselves. It goes to the operational domain where you deploy your distributed headquarters, your mobile command post, and it goes to the tactical edge. So it's really important to engage on those 3 domains. And in fact, you have family of use cases. And for example, in the army base, is permanently shown in Adadzi base, this is more the smart base. Then you have experimentations like the one which will happen next week, where this is more to study how does it help on the battlefield. And then even on the tactical edge, you have a lot of conversations on how you put 5G on infantry vehicles. So you see, we have really, across the whole chain of operations of a military institution, you can have use cases for 5G. And as a way to go deep into each of them, we are really excited to leverage tools like the European Defence Fund, which is exactly putting together the big industry defense contractors, the technology providers like the Nokias and others from the industry, and also the startups. We should not forget this is an ecosystem play. This is not at all a one company show. It's an ecosystem play, and to really study, discuss, and demonstrate the use case across each of these 3 domains. So I think we have, and this is already mature somehow, because in the experimentations you are doing, you already have the test center. There are already capabilities like, 5G is already available as a backpack, less than 8 kilo tool. So I think it's time to study, but also time to put in use. And I think it is perfectly matching the 4 challenges that was expressed by the Minister of Defense.
Very good. Thank you very much. And I'm very pleased to have Samsung on the panel, even though represented by our Swedish colleague. And indeed, something coming from South Korea where South Korea is one of the closest partners that NATO has in Asia Pacific, and with its own challenges in the region that are global challenges and also global threats with regard to cyber, hybrid, and other attacks. And Samsung has been a prominent player in that regard, working within the region, but also now much more prominent in Europe. But also on specific solutions, specific technology solutions and providers. Can you highlight some of those that you feel are very relevant to the theme of the discussion?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you very much. So I represent Samsung, and one of the things that we are paying a lot of attention on now and really working with is Open RAN, which is a new way of building networks where you come together in an ecosystem to take the best of breed components and essentially build very high performing, cost efficient solutions. Now that applies very much in the public networks during peacetime, but it can also apply in military situations. So we are working with a number of different initiatives. So since I am based in Korea, I can talk a little bit about that. So Korea has since a number of years a tactical network deployed for military use. It's run by the armed forces. That is WiMAX based at this point in time. There are planning discussions as to how to upgrade that to go into 5G, to also use low orbit satellite connections to have this resilience in case of something happens. Also recently there was an announcement between the US and Korea to collaborate on 5G for operations. As Samsung will be a provider for that to deploy. And as was also mentioned here, it is, there's a peacetime utilization of this, to build coverage and private networks for bases that can then connect to a public network for coverage outside of that private network. But there's also more of a battlefield use case where you can build tactical bubbles. So you can have networks deployed on vehicles, so you can quickly deploy a high capacity network to be able to provide that capacity that you will need if you run unmanned vehicles and the like, right? So there's a lot of different things that needs to come together here. So you have the tactical radios traditionally, and they have their uses and advantages, but they don't have a lot of capacity to provide a good video stream, for example, back to control centers, and also as you mentioned before, they can more easily perhaps be identified. So in fact, on that part, so that's a network issues, but there's also a device part of this, right? So another part that is important is to make sure these devices are actually adjusted for military use. We're working with that. We have a tactical edition of those devices where the special software makes sure that it can connect to other equipment that you have in the field, that it can make sure that it goes completely silent, which is not the case in airplane mode, for example. You need to remove all the radio emissions if you are in a covert operation, for example, right? And other things as well. So we're working with that part as well. So we have both the network part and the device part, and I think it's equally important to make those go together.
Absolutely. And the question, Matti, we have all these various devices connecting to each other. We have the sensors, we have the individual soldiers with a variety of devices. We have new entrance points, providing data, collecting data, analyzing data. How do we ensure cybersecurity? How do we ensure cyber defense that has to be there permanently? And what can this cybersecurity center, cyber defense center of excellence in Tallinn help the private sector do?
Trying to add up to what's already been said, then let's remind ourselves what is the world we are living right now. The physical threats are, you can picture it and post it, and then it's visible and digestible for masses. But the cyber threats are quite often unseen. They are not visible to regular people on street. But actually, the number of attacks in the cyberspace has raised over the last years, not in some percentages, but in multiples. And it's not peaking just like before some event, but it's constantly there, and that's the new reality. So let's not forget that. That's around us. It's invisible, but it's there, and it's totally a different world we are living now from that domain. Center of Excellence for Cyber Defense is more than 10 years old organization headquartered in Tallinn, but we have actually then 30 member nations across NATO allies, plus 9, I guess it was, supporting members from...
One NATO member.
no NATO allies as well, and the way the center works is basically we have a rotation of resources from allies based on which we focus on cybersecurity aspects. If just a couple of words more about the center, we have our own events, which is like a CyCon conference happening yearly. It's an international one. Last year there was 600 participants, purely focused on cyber defense. And then we have like our exercises, locked shields, cross swords, etc., where we then also all in all, these events they serve for raising awareness and raising our capability to deal in this environment. Now, most recently, we know that also attacks to physical infrastructure is much more hot topic, and in a way, communication platforms are also part of it, right? So 5G has been also like a specific research object in our agenda, and we are trying to parallel to doing real down to nitty-gritty details research on 5G technology as such. Then we try to embed this to our exercises, and via that raise the broader awareness, etc. Now, it was interesting to listen to the customer on my left hand and recognize that the fact like the connectivity needs to be secure was not mentioned, because it's obvious that it's all the green boxes are secure, but they are also expensive. So in a way, 5G is a pretty attractive thing, to say simple. It can be relatively cheap. It can be very secure if configured right. It can enable you this and that. Now, the complexity from our perspective is that to really secure this security of the setup of the establishment is quite a complex job, and it's not harmonized across the allies either. It's everybody's doing their own way as the technology develops. So at some point we will find ourselves that one has gone a little bit that way, another has gone a little bit of that way of implementation, and then we need to harmonize at some point in order to collaborate, as we just mentioned that at some point maybe multiple country allies need to collaborate at one physical location, and they need to use a similar establishment. So now comes the complexity of it, how to provide that in a cost-efficient, widely available, 24/7 available manner.
Absolutely, and that's why we have the exercises. That's why we have the tests, whether it's the testing in the 5G test ground or your big exercise that you're doing, the locked shields, where all the allies and partners, both civil military, but also the private sector is involved, from what I understand, right?
Right.
Okay. So for me, the takeaway is really that indeed we need this sort of talking to each other as a community approach on understanding the missions that we are in, while the private sector, of course, has a commercial interest, but in the same time, the wider security and defense mission for the society. But in the same time, making sure that within that, we are able to create the understanding, speak the same language, and be open also about the threats, challenges, and problems, and what are the best solutions, how to avoid it. So especially I look at the commercial actors, can you be open among yourselves? Can you share the solution finding? Can you share the best practices among yourselves in a reliable, friendly, allied way?
Yeah, if I may start with this. So I think one of the great assets of 5G, of course, is the interoperability, that I think is one of the key requirements of the end customer, the military, because I think it's clear for everybody that the battle will have to be conducted in coalition. So now it's really important that when you bring a technology, you enable this interoperability. And in that sense, the role of NATO, ACT in particular, that you mentioned earlier, Allied Common Transformation, is key, because they are setting the standard, the STANAG, the way to interoperate. And I think as industry, we are very pleased to be engaged by NATO through the various tools that they have to discuss with the industry to also enable 5G to be part of those standards. And for example, next week, there is exactly such a research specialist meeting from the NATO Science and Technology Organization, comparing the NATO standards with the way the wireless civil commercial industry is bringing the standard, because there is a need to cross-learn. So definitely, I think as an industry, we are really engaging on tools like what the NATO ACT is doing, tools like what the European Defence Fund is doing, and for example, the 5G compact I was alluding to earlier, are really enabling a blueprint across European Union MODs created as an industry with the ecosystem, of course, under the confidentiality requirements of defense, but which will guarantee this interoperability.
Probably as an example to the friendliness, I could give you an example that during this ACT exercise, we're having the Nokia and Ericsson.
ACT's Allied Command Transformation that is responsible for the future warfare, how NATO sees and fights future.
So in our testbed in Ardèche, the Ericsson and Nokia sits under one roof, quite friendly. So that's a good example of cooperation. So yeah, and I do believe that many more examples like coalition warrior interoperability exercise being conducted every year, where for alignment of command control and interoperability of command control systems just as well. Like we also will participate again in the lock shields. I think the tradition within the NATO circles actually to cooperate and share information is very high, and that also, of course, brings some hope that there will be some useful learnings for everybody.
Absolutely. Like you told me about the Latvian prime ministers that went to Ardèche base and became
a soldier.
Why don't you tell yourselves the practical application?
Yes. So if the prime minister arrives and is immersing himself in the fantasy of being a soldier, so he actually took the augmented reality solution. Actually, we were able to fix the super secretive and super cool SATCOM vehicle because of the usage. So this is a practical example how you can bring down the cost and bring up the speed of complex maintenance function using this new technology.
Very good. Giannis?
Well, if I may, I think we shouldn't oversimplify again this compatibility issue or interconnectivity, because there's different levels of that. One level, of course, is to link everybody on one network, and of course 5G will be good base for that. And it will reduce the costs. But again, when we go higher up to crypto or classified networks, of course, and this is I think it's not a secret that this now is the biggest issue among allies, how to connect each other with current communication systems. But once you go up higher classification, or that will mean the complete different system, complete different issues. The issue whether you share your crypto information, whether you share keys, and that is that is again national decision who is share the classified information on classified networks with whom.
Absolutely, and again the battle group in Ardèche has been testing all of that, which is quite remarkable. That's why so many allies are there, and that's why they find it so enriching in a very practical sense.
But it's the almost difficult issue to connect everybody.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But that's what would happen in a real battle. You would have to be interconnected. There is no other way. Henrik, what can you share with the other commercial actors? Can you realize that in a situation there is a team approach?
Yeah. So I think, as mentioned before, I think, so standardization is a very good vehicle, right? Because ultimately there's a lot of discussions on a technical level as to what is the best way of implementing this kind of interface. And ultimately it's a lot about interoperability on different levels, right? So there's an interoperability between like typically a core network and a radio network. If you go into more opening up the radio network as in Open RAN, there is interoperability on different layers in the software stack, as well as, between radio units and the baseband unit and so on as well, right? And the management system. So there's a lot of those. And I think, I don't think it's an industry problem in itself. I think to your point, it's probably, when it comes to crypto and some, how is that decided between the members and is it possible to agree on one way of doing it? As an industry, it's good to have an agreed way of doing it and one way of doing it that makes life easier in a sense. We will still have our areas of competition, how we actually implement that in the most efficient way and so forth. That we will still keep to ourselves, right?
Competition, long live the competition. All right, I will open the floor now to the questions to the audience here and online. Do we have any questions after these intro statements? Okay, I'm blinded by the light.
Yes,
so
we have a question here.
So please.
Microphone
Mike,
will be brought to you. And please do raise your hand so we see the next person who wants to ask a question. Please do introduce yourselves and what's your question.
Silke Holtmans, PwC. So my question is about the interoperability. I don't think that the API interoperability on a technical level will pose the challenges. I think the challenges will come more from the different usage of the network. So some countries will go with a private network approach for their military and defense. Others will go for slicing in a public network. And the third country might just issue group subscriptions as critical mission critical services. So, and these need to be harmonized somehow across the NATO members, because else you cannot have a joint activity. And you might not want to use the roaming network, so because everybody's connected to the roaming network, including the foes, the potential ones. So is there some sort of clear picture which of those roads might be preferable?
I can take that maybe.
Sure.
Because that's a very good question, and it's in our heads parallel to the practical research activities we do as well. There seems to be quite obvious that there will be no NATO guideline that, friends, this is the road we take and follow that. So what it will be is exactly as described previously, that there will be some sort of different tracks here and there. We are actually seeing on ourselves also opportunity and responsibility at the same time, that maybe we are able in a couple of now, maybe 1-2 years time, to establish some example cases that this way you could do it and solve it, or that way, and these are the pros and cons of these opportunities. And then allies can look at the material we have published or the research we have done and to their conclusions from there. So that's one potential way of how we also see our value in this landscape.
Johannes, Philip.
Well, if I may, I'm a practitioner, I'm not academician, therefore I usually more tended to look from the practical side and what is possible and what not. Of course, it's like usually everybody say, you Baltic countries have to have joint procurements, and we never can be able to achieve joint procurements. Very rarely, I am lying. But actually, it is the same with, of course, we can say that's fine with, we would prefer to standardization and agree on one standard, but I'm afraid that it's very difficult to achieve, because every country actually measures against their own national needs, and of course I would say there's also completely different levels of where you should connect. For example, if you come as a unit here, of course you would connect to probably to the joint network on unit level, but then there is the tactical networks can be, I don't know, on company or even at battalion or squad level, from not on battalion level. But then that's you can try to agree, but from my own experience, I think that is very difficult to be achieved, because it goes together with crypto information. It's not the only how you that you want to connect each other. That is not how it works. You have to basically set up whole architecture of communication, which goes from the bottom to the top, and there is a lot of classified information and many other things which involve. Therefore, yes, it would be in theory a good thing to harmonize everything, but in practice I would say it's barely impossible.
Just one remark more here related to what you say. I don't want to go down deep to details, but it's not black and white either, so we can't just say that let's follow the same standard and then it's done. It's not that easy working daily in standards and trying to focus on interoperability. There's so many details still there.
Have there been any exercises in particular, whether locked shields or others, in your experience, and this is across the panel, where lessons learned have actually shown how we can advance interoperability in a very practical way?
Not from exercises, as far as I know, but research, yes, in different domains.
Philippe and then Ingmārs.
So briefly, I will just recall that at the NATO level, they are really driving this coalition interoperability. This is their everyday job, I would say, to enable this to reach the goal of zero-day provisioning. So I think they have this federation mission networking approach where they are driving this agenda. So they will embrace 5G there. And talking about exercise, there is of course this one, but there is this coalition warrior interoperability exercise that is happening every year, and where it is on the website there, so we can mention it. 5G was already put there in use, and I think other players are contributing more. So this is coming, this is going to be standardized, and I think it will happen.
That was exactly the point I was going to make, that the coalition warrior interoperability exercise is the one probably, and the focus mostly here is of interoperability of command control systems. So in some sense, it probably sounds very simple, but in some sense it doesn't matter which network do you use. So the ultimate thing is are your command control systems compatible? So can you exchange the data, whatever the way the data has been brought in? So this has been exercised every year and will happen next year and again and again. This has been done constantly. And the other side of this story, we are of course obviously talking about the security and cybersecurity and safety. Then again, there's the Ukrainian experience, which a little bit highlights what Jānis was mentioning at the very beginning about simple and affordable. So at some point, if your soldiers have no connectivity at all, that's much worse than being secure or not secure. So sometimes having unsecured phone call maybe is better and coordinate. So we've seen Ukrainians use Discord chats for command and control. So so NATO is not used to talk about usability. So we only talk about security. We fetishize security, which is cool at the peacetime, but at the wartime, practical aspects come into play. So we have to balance the usability and security somehow.
I think this is a very relevant point, exactly as lessons learned from Ukraine show as well, that at some point, whatever works does the job. So I guess in that domain, we can also, as defense forces, be better that we have our plans in our back pocket, that in case you only have the very worst options, then what's affordable for what use case, and then maybe some over-the-top and cryptography, always easy to attach on top, something like that.
Absolutely. Audience?
So, do we have any questions from the audience? There is a question right there. Excellent.
Hello, my name is Anatoly Golovko. I'm the advisor on the cybersecurity to the Prime Minister of Moldova. Actually, I have two questions, and they are on two levels, on the application level and on, let's say, on the physical layer. Since the time of blue boxes, we forgot the lesson learned, and in IMS architecture, we expose it all the signaling in VoLTE and other things, we expose it directly to the end user. And honestly, I don't see how it helped to the cybersecurity of the voice and multimedia networks over the 4G and 5G. Is there any research or anyone who is from IT world or internet world coming in telco world, addressing these IMS security issues they may occur? It's one question. And the second question is how much of effort it's put on having multiple cryptography on the radio interface, because now usually is the public network who is choosing or who is giving with the cryptography to be used to encrypt the radio interface. And when we are talking about interoperability or roaming between networks, we don't have much control, for example, as a state, over the private public network on the encryption of the radio interface. And as I know from the architecture of 3GPP, we put a lot of trust just in the encryption of the radio interface, and beside the base station, everything is encrypted and untrusted. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I can try to cover the first one if somebody takes the radio one.
So let's split the questions.
So I guess the current networks with their downsides, as you described, for example, but there's others as well. I think you can't jump over your shadow. it's there, the installed base is there, the technology and the implementations, everything is there. So basically, for the defense purposes, you need to justify it as it is with its pros and cons, and then place it into right place where you then call it right to use this environment or this platform. But from another angle, it's a known fact that the risks and the transparency is there, and it's not that secure from this perspective you highlighted. So for instance, our research from this factor is purely forward-looking and based on the standalone architecture only, where authentication of devices, all that is done in a pretty different way, all the different network functions involved, etc.
Thank you. Philip, maybe something? No?
So, and for the radio point, so first, for example, at Nokia, we put a lot of effort on quantum safe networking. So we do that for our IP and optics backbone, but also on the radio, as an example, this summer at 3GPP, we pushed a work item which prepare for 256 bit algorithm on the radio air interface to prepare for this quantum safe radio encryption. So again, as you can see, we talk a lot about standard, and the great thing with 5G and 3GPP is that standards are enriched every 18-month cycle. So this is an example on the way we can continue to make the technology reach the next level of security as per the need from the field. So, and then in terms of you said radio and what's next, I mean, everything is in the standard. So if we mandate that some functions or some features which are sometimes optional in the standard become mandated to be used, that's exactly the role of the standardization, for example, at NATO, to define out of this huge list of capabilities of 5G, what is really mandatory to meet the military expectations.
Very good.
Yeah, maybe I can comment on that too. So yeah, to your point, right? So there's work being done in the standard on the radio interface and so on. But it also depends a little bit on what you want to send, right? Because obviously, if you're sending a video stream, you can, that video stream in itself can be encrypted, right? So you have different layers, obviously, of encryption, right? So that is something that comes down again then to the device and adjustments.
That's a good point. Very good point, actually.
No.
All right.
If I may, I think that's everything, and it was mentioned already. It's about everything is about managing your risks, and of course, nobody would put the most secure encrypted communication system on individual soldier on a squad level, because that is information that is there. It's on time, and it's important to pass that information. You don't need to because after 1 minute it will be the information will be already old. But of course, it's completely different on higher levels, on brigade or upper levels. And then you start to think what is, how do you actually balance the risks, which communication you use actually to pass the information, whether you need to crypt it or not. And that's, it's not so straightforward. It's very complicated actually to have this whole communication system.
Just a very quick comment here again, that the military communication do not live without command control system. So the ultimate angle is, or aim is, to kill voice communication as much as possible. So you just don't talk. You are on air just with little glimpse of data in the command control system. So you don't, which is also practical from the radio safety. So if you talk and if you bring your message over the voice, it just takes much more time and you are much more visible. Your footprint is much more visible. So killing voice communication is the first thing you should probably do.
That's a good takeaway. All right, we have formally 2 minutes, but I will take the liberty to go a little bit over time because I do want to touch the subject of lessons learned from Ukraine, from Russia's war in Ukraine, both the capabilities that Russia has shown in electronic warfare and how Ukrainians are dealing with that. And again, this is a public discussion. We won't go into details, but the agility, the innovations, the can-do attitudes, the mindset of doing that right there on the battlefield within a short time frame to be able to continue warfighting and understanding both the data the metadata that is coming in and being able to respond is something probably one lesson learned that we all, both on the private and public sector, should take into account. Resilience of Ukrainians and Ukrainian systems and everything. And I know that Ingmārs' point is resilience is autonomy, that autonomy is resilience, and maybe you can say a few words on that. The networks, where do we keep our clouds? How do we make them resilient and accessible? And you already mentioned the utilization and security. What is the balance there? So can you please add some more points? Ingmārs, let's go one by one.
Yeah. So
Jānis, you last. You will do the strategic point.
So yeah, I mean, obviously, I think everybody can see that today, of course, the Ukraine is an absolute top-notch place where everything happens and all the things are being de facto tested in the real life. And of course, we can see enormous effort of Ukrainian nation and their resilience is amazing. So what we can tell from we've had a lot of discussion with our Ukrainian counterparts. So probably yes, three things. And one thing is clearly quite a lot discussed here today, that there has to be a balance between usability and security. Pretty much covered here today is that we are a little bit too much on the security side. So you have to make communication affordable to all the soldiers. As Jānis mentioned, this is also a clear message from Ukraine. The other thing is autonomy. The thing Ukrainians do in restoring the base. So they have like 4,000 base stations have been damaged so far in Ukraine, so they're doing amazing job actually restoring those. So there, I mean, very, 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 very basic things come in the top of the list. So one thing is your transport network. You can probably see the pictures with a little Starlink dish placed on the top of the base station tower today. So that's the way how you work around the broken fiber or broken transport networks, as well as means of electricity supply and all the generators and diesel and so on and so forth. This is the way. If you have no electricity, no fiber, you can still get the base and the operations working. So I mean, for us, I mean, building out new base station probably takes a year or two. For them, restoring the base station, maybe takes a week. So that's a completely different thinking. And then we should probably learn from this. And and last point is probably virtualization. These days, a lot of customers and partners, they let's say go for cloud strategies, but they like to talk about on-premises and in-country and so on and so forth, as that would mean higher levels of security and safety. And probably Ukraine example, of course, clearly showed that locating your critical data in some particular physical place is probably a very bad idea. So that makes them ultimately vulnerable. So actually going for true virtualization is probably the way to go to actually achieve more security.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much.
So very briefly, I would echo the lessons expressed by the Ministry of Defense here. So I think one of the learnings is the transparency of the battlefield. I think it's really like every side is seeing nearly everything. So I think the camouflage is a very important point, and we express it also like hiding in plain sight. So using 4G or 5G is enabling you to communicate, but also to hide compared to a military waveform, which is immediately identified that this is, of course, a soldier. So the second point probably is also the mass, I would say, effect, and the fact that 5G is a huge ecosystem, a huge supply chain. I think it enables affordability and innovation. And I also, maybe to close there, it is the life cycle of innovating. The 5G is a platform which is really enabling the ecosystem to bring a lot of innovation very quickly.
Very good. Henrik.
Yes. Yeah, so I think some of the things that have been mentioned here, but obviously, so what we see is obviously that existing infrastructure is sensitive to attack, right? So it can be destroyed, and you need ways of handling that. So I think it's important in preparing to have communication on different levels and building redundancy and resilience in that way. So you will have the existing public network as one layer. You will probably have some easy to deploy, quick to deploy tactical bubbles that you can move easily. And you may also want to consider, satellite communication to
Yeah, we didn't touch much about it, but indeed that's something both at the lower orbit and a higher level, which is...
And then it becomes important how you make that interwork, right? So,
Yeah.
so there's some interworking functions defined in 3GPP, and you want to decide, how do you do that? So you use some functions like that. You may have one core network, or you may have several core networks that ultimately will connect them to your
That would be a discussion of its own, huh? That could be a discussion of its own.
It could, indeed.
Very interesting. All right, Matti.
The question deserves its own slot. Many important things are already said. If I should try to give a little bit of different angle to this question here in this forum, we are currently working in a follow-up study where we take the current lessons learned from Ukraine as a basis, and then on top of that we try to put the perspective that, okay, following to this lessons learned, how should we develop our networks further from here, including what the 5G technology brings in, like beamforming antennas, etc. But just an example which wasn't yet mentioned, the importance of silence in the field. So you need to go there, you need to switch everything out at some point, because otherwise you're a target. So all that...
Very good. Giannis,
I
you
think
have the concluding.
I think that's not always we have to take everything for granted that it will work the same way as it does in Ukraine currently. And but I think that when it comes to mobile communication, we saw basically not many mobile towers were destroyed intentionally because Russians were using the same communication during the war. But from our perspective, I think one thing is, of course, military communication, but the other thing what is important when especially you talk about the defense of your own country, not somewhere else, then how the rest of your economy will work. Because that is probably, that what we recognize that basically one thing, army will not be able to fight in some kind of autonomous space. You will still need a lot of economy supplying food, basically fuel, banks working, and that I think what we've been devoting a lot of attention how to ensure is that basically all those critical services are provided for the society, and that is probably even much more difficult issue because if your people will not be able to get money from banks, we will lose the war probably in a few days because there was simply disappointment of that. And
preparations, exercising scenarios, and being challenged constantly by our private sector and out of government part of thinking. Thank you so much, all the panelists.
Round of applause.